Welcome back to another episode of Steve and Friends. This week we have a special guest, Mike Radzicki. Mike is an economist and a professor at WPI and also specializes in system dynamics. I hope you enjoy the show. I certainly will. Let's get it going. Welcome back to Steve and Friends. I'm Ty Keynes. It is March 11th, 2023. We have a very special guest today. He is an expert in system dynamics, so that is a key criteria for getting on the show. Although I guess if you don't know system dynamics, you can come along. But it makes it better if you know system dynamics because that's a language I can speak in. I'll bring that special guest on in a moment. I'm going to bring on Dan first. Dan, how you doing, buddy?
Whoa, I feel really good today. Yeah.
Why do you feel really good, Dan?
I don't know. I feel really optimistic, and I think we've got a great show and a great guest lined up, and I'm excited to hear what he's got to say today.
I like optimism. So, can we do some housekeeping? What do we got going on right here, Dan?
Oh, okay. Well, we've got Thomas Surjed. I think that's how we pronounce it. Well, he's jumped right in and he's showing us firsthand how these comments work, right? So, Ty, do that hand thing again. Okay, so this on the right-hand side is the extraordinary graphic design ability from Tyrone Keynes. And here we've got people who are commenting in a live environment. So we've got Thomas already contributing. We want to hear more. So come on, guys, let's jump into the conversation.
That's right. So if you are on YouTube, make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you subscribe. If you're watching this on Twitter, make sure you hit the like button and retweet. Then come over here, do some commenting on the side. We enjoy interacting with you. In fact, we do a little special graphic each week. So I've promised all our viewers that we would do this each week. So Ghost on the Half Shelf, again, you are our top chatter. So I appreciate that. Now, these names, I don't know if they're actual names or just like letters mashed on the keyboard, but I'll go through them. And I do have two academics here with us today, so they might correct me on my pronunciation. So we've got Zamborska, we've got WWE Fan 0104. That would be Josh. Josh, thank you for always joining us. We got Renora. We've got Jean Marie Bontemps. Oh, I like it. And our number one troll from last week was Potato Sack. We ended up shaming him away in about the 1 hour and 45 minute mark. So thanks for being our number one troll, Potato Sack. We appreciate it. We'll never ban you because we much rather just make fun of you. Murphy, we have Murphy at number 7. Guy Midgley, number 9, we have Demetris Gonzales, and finally, Tom Kinnair. I hope I said all those names right. I've made a little tick.
So and Ty's gone silent there for a minute.
Yeah, because I'm button mashing myself here to try to get things going. I'm not doing very well. I'll take the graphic down. We're already off the rails, and it's only 5 minutes in. I'm going to bring in Steve Keen so we can get some cohesion going here. Mr. Keen.
Hi, guys. Good to be here. And very much looking forward to chatting with Mike, too. Mike, just to get this out on the table straight away, Mike's a bloke. If we're in the same city, we'd be running mates, we'd be party mates. He's a great guy, as well as a fabulous contributor to System Dynamics. So, and he deserves far more of a profile than he's got. So we're happy to give him a bit of help along here.
Okay, and I see Thomas has corrected me on my pronunciation. I am sorry, Thomas. It's going to be apparently or like blatantly clear that my intellect level is probably going to be the lowest out of the 4 people participating
Come
today.
on.
So without further ado, I'm going to bring on,
Come on.
Go ahead, Steve. Where you got?
No, I was just shut up, Ramanujan, and bring on the Professor Ramanujan.
Here he is.
If anybody doesn't know what I'm talking about, okay. Hey, Mike. G'day, mate. How are you?
Hey, hi, Steve. Hi, everyone.
Do you remember when you and I were young Turks once? We don't look like it anymore, do we? We're still behaving like it. Oh my God!
I have 8 grandchildren. So
yeah.
So,
oh my God!
So let's we'll start getting the. We don't do really interviews here. This is a casual chat. But what I want to get from Mike right away is, what is system dynamics? Because I know a lot of our viewers are more into the economic part of things, and they don't necessarily know what system dynamics is. So could you sum it up for us?
Sure. Hello to everybody, and I really appreciate being invited here today. This is really cool. What is system dynamics? I get asked that all the time, and really it depends on, my answer depends on, who's asking the question. If it's a technical person, which is, 1 in 10, I'll say, well, it's a way of numerically simulating or solving nonlinear ordinary differential equations. Now, most people, their eyes glaze over, whatever that means, but the technical people think that's neat. For everyone else, I say it is a method for redesigning a complex system. Let's say an airplane that's not behaving well. Let's say the airplane is flying, just not flying very well. It might be flying slow. It might be flying in a fuel inefficient manner. It might be bouncing the passengers around or whatever. There might be 1 or 7, whatever the number of problems are. And we don't want to just throw the airplane away. We want to redesign it so it performs better. And so that's what we do with system dynamics. You could technically model an airplane with it, but it's really designed for redesigning the airplane when the airplane is a social system, a system with people in it, but it can also have technical stuff in it and what have you.
That's great.
Yeah, for example, just to follow up on that, one of my other great mates in system dynamics, you've met him, I think, is Trun Andresen, who is based at the Norwegian University of Technology in Trondheim. Of course, Trun wants me to remind everybody that Trondheim was named after him 1,000 years ago. But anyway, so Trun, the whole institute there is largely focused upon shipbuilding. So he's the person who got an economic and social interest, but he uses another tool called Simulink, which comes with MATLAB, which is a very heavy engineering, very heavy mathematical tool. And Simulink is actually the system they use for designing, for example, control systems on ocean floating wind farms. So to make sure the thing doesn't fall over, you've got to have motors that can move it, and in response to the current, then it will rewrite itself. And they give an illustration where there was a particular ship, forgotten which one it was, where they hadn't properly designed the motors needed to stop the ship hitting the dock when it came into to lodge, and sure enough, it destroyed the ship. So the system dynamics says, what's the feedbacks? What are the complex nonlinear dynamics of bringing a boat close to a wharf? Then we design it in software, and we get the simulated ship not to hit the simulated dock, and then we embed that in controllers, and therefore that means the future ships don't crash.
Yeah, that's a great story and example, Steve. I want to maybe point out for all the listeners that the system dynamics and is not unfamiliar to engineering. Say, for example, fluid dynamics or the study of fluids. Engineers, they model things, dynamic systems all the time, right? And so I think, and Steve's gonna chime in here, but effectively, Steve's major work is to bring the computing power and the discipline of an engineering and physics mentality into economics, and that is what you're doing with system dynamics. Is that right?
and that's why system dynamics matters so much, because for a start, you could do this stuff in a whole bunch of equations. Okay, you could write the equations, you can write them in paper and type them into a program. That's feasible. But the advantage of system dynamics is you actually flow the causal links, and you actually, in fact, laying out the causal process can help you understand the system itself better than you'll ever do by trying to read computer code. And so it's the combination of the visual way of designing the equations and then the visual feedback the software gives you. That's what makes it so powerful. And it doesn't have to assume equilibrium, which is the other bane of my life and Mike's life, of a bunch of morons, pardon me, professors of economics, who believe that you've got to do everything in equilibrium. And the intention of system dynamics is dynamic equilibrium is one possible state of a system, which is highly unlikely to apply without massive interventions from the outside.
Mike, what do you think about equilibrium?
Yeah, just a quick comment on that. Mm-hmm. I agree with what Steve is saying, but equilibrium is something that we use all the time in system dynamics, actually, not because we believe real systems are ever in such a state, but it's a wonderful reference point particularly when you're building a system dynamics model. So in equilibrium, everything is a horizontal line when you plot it, right? Because everything is unchanged, right? And so if you shock it from the outside with something, a step, a pulse, noise, whatever, anything that is not a horizontal line must be the response of the system to that shock. It's processing it. It's dealing with it. And so that's very useful when you're trying to make sure you've got your I's dotted and your T's crossed with your equations and your logic and what have you. It doesn't mean that then we say, let's always run it in equilibrium or that's a goal or something, but it's a very useful sort of tool, I guess you might say. And so we spend a lot of time teaching people how to do the modeling.
Yeah, I mean, I teach people how to derive their equilibrium for a system as well. Because that is inevitably mathematical, which can freak people out. The difference between what you and I do and what mainstream economists do is they simply assume equilibrium is stable. And this is where I've got to use a technical term here. This is where this bullshit called friction comes from in neoclassical models. Everything is a friction. Why is it a friction? It slows down how fast you get to equilibrium. Their feeling is that capitalism without interventions will get rapidly to equilibrium, and we have these frictions that slow it down. And their vision is always attractive, always stable equilibrium, which is nonsense in a dynamic system.
Well, that's a libertarian ideology there, right? I mean, they're trying to justify a libertarian ideology, right?
And that's what's built into the way neoclassicals think, because they've got this equilibrium as a goal, as a strength of a capitalist system. And whatever strength it has, equilibrium is the last thing that comes to mind for me. It's the dynamics, which is interesting, the evolutionary dynamics in particular. And that's, again, the system dynamics sets you up for understanding that.
Yeah, I think all the interesting...
Mate, I'm talking over the top of you.
Well, all the interesting stuff happens outside of equilibrium. So, like I said, we can put a model into equilibrium, and we can shock it out, and we can build simple models that smoothly move from one equilibrium to another, like it's a comparative static model, which then why have the dynamics? There's nothing interesting. It just goes from equilibrium A to equilibrium B. Big deal. But that's in the real world, that's not what happens. Interesting stuff happens in between the equilibrium, right? And so that's where, the simulation, the dynamics really illuminate things for people. And I think in terms of the obsession with equilibrium, I suspect that it's part of a narrative going back to old Adam Smith about the invisible hand and markets clear and and all that sort of stuff. And so it just sort of supports that story.
And it's so deeply in their mind they're not even aware that it's a mental trap. They think it's an illumination. So you and I, let's talk about you talk about your center, mate. What do you teach at WPI? Give us a bit of background to WPI and your program there and the sort of stuff you teach.
Sure. Well, the reason I came to WPI years ago was to start a program at the interface of system dynamics and economics. And we've been more or less trying to do that over the years. So I teach econ classes. I'm basically a macro and money classes, and then system dynamics classes, the pure, how do you do these types of models classes. And if I were to say, what is our sort of specialty, the thing that my doctoral students and I are working on is the interface of, economics, but particularly now behavioral and experimental economics, system dynamics, and gaming. So once you have a model that tells you something, is insightful and what have you, and has realistic human decision making in it, verified in experiments and all that good stuff, how do you get others who are not mathematically inclined? They might be in positions of power, they might be politicians or what have you. How do you get them to get the insights from what you've learned? And writing insights on a whiteboard and saying memorize these and do these things, that doesn't work, right? But if you give somebody an engaging game, it can be fun, but it's not a ha-ha game like shooting zombies, but it's a game where you're trying to accomplish something. They derive the insights, or they discover the insights themselves. And so, designing an engaging game that preserves the economics and what have you is a challenge in and of itself. So we're trying to figure out how not just to do that like on a one-off, but developing a teachable, repeatable way of doing that, and then applying it to you name the problem.
Can you give an example of an insight? I mean, let's not take it into a game scenario right now, but just give me an example of a simple insight that a politician would resonate with a politician.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm an expert witness in some court cases now where system dynamics is being used in civil court to estimate the size of damages. And so, of course, lawyers aren't trained in system dynamics, so my phone rings increasingly when the one side is using a system dynamics model to attack the other side. So what they'll do is they'll build a model that has the alleged misconduct in it, and they'll turn that on and fit it to the data from an actual system. And then they'll turn off the alleged misconduct and rerun the model. And the difference between the two is the size of the damages. They'll put a dollar amount to it, whatever.
Wow. Okay.
And so I've been on the defense side for 4 cases, and they've said, well, look at the model and tell us what you think. And one of the things I see repeatedly so far, I don't have a very large sample size, but in the 4 cases I've been on, the modelers have left out a lot of actors or agents in the system. And so they give a very simplistic model, like open this valve, open the flow bigger. Oh, look, there's more stuff in the bathtubs. It's like a tautology. Well, of course, but they don't explain why the valves got opened. And they say, well, it's obvious that there's this misconduct and those valves would be open. And I say, no. One of the insights in system dynamics with all these feedback loops is that systems adapt. So if you model correctly all of the players in the system, even if the misconduct is happening, and I'm not admitting that it is, but even if you don't know what's going to happen because everybody's going to adapt in the system. So the example I use, because you can't give them a giant example to a jury or whatever. A simple example is an attempt to raise the birth rate in Hungary in I think it was the 1960s. And the politicians were alarmed. We're not going to have enough Hungarians around if this continues. And even if we do, they're going to be all old people. So we got to boost the birth rate. So their policy change was to make family planning much more difficult than it was at the time. And you got this giant spike in the birth rate for about a year. And then it went right back to where it was, and it was even less, because the system adapted. The people in Hungary didn't want bigger families. So they discovered workarounds to get around the restrictions. And they actually made the birth rate worse in a very short amount of time. I've heard, I don't know if it's true, that the second part of the story is nearby in, it was Romania where that happened. In Hungary, nearby, they had a similar problem, and their policy approach was not to make family planning more difficult, but rather to build playgrounds, schools, and larger apartments. And the birth rate went up and stayed up. And it's not that Romanian people didn't like children, they didn't have anywhere to put them. So when you have other agents in the system who have different goals than the policymakers, they work against you. Those negative loops are trying to hold the system where it's at, and it undermines a lot of policies.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I want to give another example, Mike. I don't know if you've heard of this statistic before, and I don't know what the rate is, but it's theft in a population. Okay, so if you have a business, there's a certain percentage of theft that happens in say like a retail environment, right? And what's interesting is that it operates more like a constant. So you can go to different locations, different countries, and you've always got something silly like 7% of theft or something. We could call it shrinkage if we're looking at like a production assembly line or something like that, right? But what I find fascinating about that is that you could have somebody who's somebody that maybe is completely against that. But what point does the dynamic of the system actually change person that would never steal into somebody that would steal? Do you know what I'm trying to say?
I mean, yeah, if it's not punished, or you can get away with it, maybe more people are going to do it, I guess, or it starts to become acceptable, socially acceptable. Certain amounts of sort of cheating on or speeding, a little bit over the speed limit is technically wrong, but they let it go.
Actually, I can throw in one from one of your colleagues. Is Tarweed still with you, Mike?
I'm sorry, is
Tarweed still on your team? I can't think of how to pronounce his name properly, but Tarweed.
Khalid Saeed.
He may be somebody else's. Sorry?
So we have our staff. We have Oleg Pavlog and Khalid Saeed.
Yeah, there's another guy who's one of the post-Keynesian community. His name's Tarweed. Tarweed Linwood, I think. I'm not sure of the
Linwood
name.
Howey. Linwood Howey. He's still at UMKC.
Yeah. Oh, okay. But his PhD thesis was to examine why did the results of black kids decline over time. And what he found was the attitude of the white teachers to them. They slowly absorbed the attitude of the white teachers that they weren't as bright as the white kids, and their own attention and focus on learning declined. And he showed that these declining results were actually the result of the attitude of the teachers, not what the students themselves were doing. So what you had to do is to get the teachers to say, look, you're not aware of it. This is what they call the unconscious bias thing. But if you're not aware of it, if you're racist, of course you're aware of it. But if you're not racist and what you're saying is, well, you expect this decline to happen in the future, the kids absorb it. So you've got to do some way to say, look, to pump them up. And that was a large part of his. Thank you, Joe, about my article on Galbraith. But that was a major way that his system dynamics contributed to explaining a phenomenon they had no other explanation for. So it was great work. And it's a very powerful tool. People just aren't aware of how powerful it is.
Yeah, we have a generic structure in system dynamics that appears a lot. It's called drift to low performance. That kind of sounds like what you're talking about, what Lynn was looking at, and that is when you got a negative loop, it's like a thermostat. There's a goal or a target, and if your bathtub, your stock, your state of your system is not at the target or the goal, corrective action is motivated. But if the stock slips, if you get low performance, and then from that you say my goal is going to slip, because that's how we always do it, or I can't do it, or look at that, and then you're chasing an ever lower standard, right? And so you can get slippage in product quality,
Like in terms of my own work on that front, I've my model of Hyman-Minsky's financial instability hypothesis. I added when I had a government sector, which has where the government sector spending is based upon a target level of employment. Okay, let's say unemployment. I normally use employment for mathematical reasons, but say a target level of unemployment. And if you start with a target level of 2%, then you respond as soon as unemployment gets above 2%. But if you then have a financial crisis, like let's go back to 1974, where in Australia's case, the unemployment rate rose from 1.5% to 5% that year, then what became acceptable in politicians for a level of unemployment, it also rose. And so then rather than drawing the line at 2%, they started drawing at 3%, 4%, 5%, and ultimately 8%. And that drift of the target meant the government control system diminished because of the failure of the system to be controlled by the government spending. And so that's a classic instance where the behavioral change feeds into the system and damages it. Say, no, if you want to have a stable system, you have to set that target and stick with it. You don't let it drift.
Yeah, so it's like justifying the change, right? An unemployment rate at 5%, you see that it changes, and then it becomes empirical justification to say, you know, the new norm is this, the new norm is this, the new norm is that. Is that what you're saying, Steve?
That was the standard, yeah. So one of the odd things I might point out in my work over the years when I have my toe in the economics swimming pool rather than this system dynamics swimming pool, usually the two swimming pools don't merge. The SD people don't hang around with economists or vice versa. People like Steve and myself are some of the few people who have credentials kind of in both camps. But what I find is economists are certainly aware and have been aware certainly since the 1940s and probably before of stocks and flows, the fundamental sort of Lego pieces that we use to do dynamic modeling, right? You know, all dynamics in the world occurs when flows accumulate in stocks. Nature integrates, right? So economists are aware of that. Economists are also aware, not across the board, but there's a lot of economists who are aware of feedback loops. Phillips of the Phillips curve, right, did a lot with feedback loops. Circular and cumulative causation from Gunnar Myrdal, a Nobel laureate. Axel Janefud was into it. You know, so there's a lot of instances of well-known economists who are aware of feedback loops and their importance, and yet none of these concepts have been smeared together into a coherent way of doing economics, except for, you know, what Steve is up to and what the SD folks have been up to, and yet the economists they tend not to listen. So it's rather
they all believe it's solved by equilibrium. I mean, there's actually I'll put the bird into a non-neoclassical economist this time around. I don't know if he's still alive or not, but a guy called Ian Steedman, who was a first-class mathematician. And he was doing Schaffian style economic, which is another form of non-orthodox economics derived from Piero Schaffer's work. And he attacked the post-Keynesian at one point, and his attack was to say that because when you're doing the type of mathematics he was doing, you're working out the equilibrium properties of a matrix, a set of matrix equations. And as part of that, he said there's no such thing as a markup and a profit rate that are separate. He said the conditions of production will generate the rate of profit. And if you have a markup which is different to that, then it's irrelevant. The markup itself is determined by the set of equations to solve the matrix, the input-output matrix. And I actually remember him saying that, in other words, equilibrium doesn't deny feedbacks. Equilibrium gives time for the feedbacks to have their full effects, quote unquote. So I wrote a critique of his paper saying, I'm sorry, if you're living in a dynamic world, your matrix can be different to what it is in a static world, and you can have a markup which causes equilibrium prices to not exist. You end up with a set of multisectoral inflation over time. The sort of stuff that Blair Fix is doing now at the statistical level. I generated that out of a difference equation model. And so the belief that he had nonetheless, that equilibrium gives time for feedbacks to have its full effects, that's the common conceit and false conceit of neoclassical economists.
So I'm going to cut in here. I just want to thank everybody for tuning in. Right now on Twitter, we've got about 25 people. Here we've got 21. Make sure if you're on Twitter, come over here, join the chat. The chat is a little bit slow right now, so let's get some chats going in there, and let's get our likes on YouTube up to 30 within the live stream time frame. If that happens, I'll wear a suit next week on next week's live stream. Kind of like what's that famous podcaster's name? Lex Friedman. except mine will be bluish.
Oh yeah, okay. That's a good one. I like that. Okay.
Actually, I don't know if many people, if we got an audience here in Canada, but we had a hockey night in Canada named a guy named Don Cherry, and
Oh, yeah.
he would wear a different suit every week, polka dots and stuff like that. And I've thought about doing that, but the costs required of me to actually do that would be in the tens of thousands per year. So at this point, I can't do it for monetary reasons.
We got to put a QR code on where people can donate to the Ty Keen's Don Cherry Fund.
Maybe. I kind of want to steer this conversation to the next kind of area, which I usually do at the beginning, is what is the connection between Mike and Steve? Like, when did you guys first meet? Have you done any projects together? And maybe I'll get Mike to comment first on that.
Yeah.
I think I met Steve in 2002 at UMKC, University of Missouri, Kansas City, at a conference. And I think we were chit-chatting and we figured out that we were kind of doing the same thing. And I think the last time we were together was at Trondheim in Norway on Trond's dissertation defense. We were the external examiners.
That's right, yeah.
So that was kind of neat. And I know Steve has visited at WPI and my home at one point, and we've kept in touch over the years. We haven't done we put out a book called Feedback Economics last year, and Steve contributed a paper to the book. So I guess in that sense, we had a project together. So that's in a nutshell.
But that's partly the problem. I mean, if I had to grab about 50 people that I desperately want to work with to reproduce a new economics, you're one of that 50. Other people like Blair Fix, Ty and Daniel themselves. There's a range of people, Matthias Griselli, so many bloody Canadians, it scares me, frankly. But anyway, but pull those people together and then have us working 9 to 5, 40, 60 to 80 hours a week, like a Elon Musk style factory to produce nonlinear dynamics and economics and realism. That's what I'd like to be doing. But of course, we're all scattered. We get trivial amounts of money. We end up in vastly physically separated institutions, and there's no possibility for us to get together. Whereas if we were mainstream economists, I'd be saying, hey, Ben, things are much better down here at Yale. Why don't you come and join me? I'm William, and we can work together producing bullshit. Neoclassical economics. They could make the moves much more easily than we can. So that's it's tragic that we have all these great people who can't be brought together to do that collective work.
So the guy who created system dynamics, Jay Forrester, I'm not sure if you know about Jay's background or not. He's an electrical engineer, one of the inventors of the digital computer. He created MIT's first general purpose digital computer called Whirlwind 1, and he has the patent on magnetic core storage, which all digital computers use to configure their primary memory until the silicon chip days. And then he headed up the SAGE air missile defense system for the United States that was spun off into MITRE Corporation, and now it's the AWACS system and all that. And then he went into management. Because he figured the biggest impediment to progress in the world is systems with people in them. And he figured that out from being a manager on these large-scale engineering projects. So he smeared together what he knew: servo mechanisms, feedback systems, and digital computers and management, and made what we know today as system dynamics. And up until about the late 60s, he was doing all corporate modeling. He would go, a corporation would be having a problem, and he'd go in and he'd talk to people and say, well, what do you do? And he could write equations capturing their decision rules and what seemed let's call it bounded rational here and bounded rational here and bounded rational here, entirely reasonable. When you hooked it all together, the corporate model behaved poorly and mimicked the bad behavior of the company. And then you had a laboratory for experimenting, right, on how to make that corporation better. But in 1968, the former mayor of Boston said, if you can model a city, a company, can you model a city? And Jay said, yeah, I can do that. So they did the urban dynamics model, which became somewhat controversial. It's the basis of the games SimCity, by the way. And then from that, he was asked, if you can model a city, can you model the world problematique, the predicament of mankind? And so for the Club of Rome, they did the first world models. And that really got the economists' attention. And they started battling with Jay a lot, basically saying, you're playing in our sandbox now, the macro sandbox, and we don't like it. So Jay and the SD people were of the opinion that economists hate system dynamics. And it wasn't until I came along and they said, some economists are going to hate it. You got to talk to the right economists. He was unaware that there were schools of thought or whatever. Here's my point. When I would talk to him, I'd say, well, what should I be doing to, promote system dynamics and economics? And I'm kind of just myself, and, I'm now, there's the people in this group here, but, there's only so many of us. And he said, are you writing journal articles? And I go, well, yeah, I'm a professor. He goes, well, then you're writing for other economists, aren't you? And I said, yeah. And he goes, why are you doing that? And I said, well, that's how you get tenure and promotion. He goes, exactly. He goes, economists don't care about the economy. Academic economists don't. They care about writing econ papers that are, praised by other economists. He says, you don't do that. He goes, write for the business community and write for the general public. And he said, you'll get a lot of attention. They're clamoring for this sort of stuff. And he said, forget about it. So I've kind of taken that to heart. And I mean, this sort of forum we have right here is kind of that. I don't know if we have any professional economists here or how many, but you get people who are just interested in the topic, and they might not have the socialization that most economists have.
Mike, do you recognize that plot on the screen?
Oh, there's Jay's
Mike.
Model. Okay, urban dynamics. Okay.
Yeah, it's funny you brought up urban dynamics because I actually just ported that model into Minsky a few weeks ago. So I've got a question here for you. I'll take this down. What is, from a historical perspective, what is your favorite system dynamic model? And then I'll tell you mine.
One that I didn't build.
One that you didn't build, because if that's the case, then I have a favorite model that I built too, and that would kind of take away from this fun little exercise.
Well, I'm a macro money guy, so I do like Jay's national model, but it's a giant thing and it's unpublished and whatever. But a small version of it that's been turned into a game, and we use it a lot, by John Sturman. It's called Stratagem, and it's a really neat little. I like it because it's a small model, so it's not like let's take 15 weeks to figure it out, but it's dynamically complex. And what you end up doing is there's no predetermined behavior, and you have complete information, complete control of the capital sector. All you have to make is one decision every simulated period, but you almost always generate economic cycles. So it's quite a neat little model, and it's compact and it's fun and what have you. One that I've built that I like, and I'm working with some military ROTC kids, or officers in training, involves leadership subordinate interrelationships. And so we have a model where the subordinate sector has the hours they sleep, the hours they train, and their energy level. And then they have a psychological sector where they're intrinsically and or extrinsically motivated. Basically, are you motivated from yourself, or are you motivated by your leader motivating you, either criticizing you or praising you? And then you have a leadership sector, and the leader's trying to figure out what to do with this guy or gal. And they're either stubborn and they're a praiser or a criticizer, and it's my way or the highway, or they're adaptive. And they say, look, I have an objective here. And if I got to pat you on the back, I'll do that. If I got to kick you in the pants, I'll do that. But when I notice I'm not getting anywhere with my approach, I'm willing to adapt. And I like it because it's very hard, even though I built the model, for me to know on any given setup of the model. You set up the subordinate a certain way, a certain energy level, and what have you. Oh, and the performance score is the score on the Army's running test. You can max out at 600 points. And I don't know ahead of time what's going to happen in the model most of the time. And I've simulated it 1,000 times. I built it because there's so much going on with the adaptive feedbacks in the model. But it's kind of, we've turned it into a game, and we're running it with human subjects. One of the kids is doing it for a senior thesis now, running human subjects through it. And we're going to see if anybody learns about leadership from the thing.
So that's really interesting. So
and yours, Ty, what's your favorite?
Right. What's my? Sorry, I actually forgot that was a question. I was listening to Mike so much I forgot my own question. My favorites.
Your favorite model.
Yeah, I'm a traditionalist, so I go right back to Jay Forrester. So it's a toss up between the World 2 model and urban dynamics. Now I know they're dated now, and I also know we've got World 3 and the Earth for All, the new Earth for All, which is much larger. But like Mike was saying, World 2 is much more simplistic. So in some ways, because I can digest all of the model mathematically and visually, it's very interesting to me. So I guess those would be my two favorite historical models. I have to put up Steve Keen's financial instability model, because that's kind of what drew me into system dynamics. And when you have three system levels interacting and you create that instability, which kind of goes into the Lorenz equations, et cetera. So I guess that would be up there. And probably a bunch of my own models. I've done my own macro models. I've done pandemic models. But I'm not. I don't want to sound egotistical if I say my models are the best, but they probably are. A joke. Ba-doom. Daniel, you were going to ask.
And Mike, I've got it. Yeah, Dan, you dive in with your question. Sorry. Yeah.
My question was just a little bit more geared towards the layman audience. And Mike, I'd like to ask you this question. When you come up with a model, how certain that you have accounted for all the inputs? I mean, that's one of my biggest questions, is that, eventually you got to draw a line and say, there are some exogenous factors that we haven't modeled here. So how do we all agree in the room that these are, and is there a mathematical way to say anything below this will have such a negligible effect it's not worth modeling? And then I think of the butterfly effect. So what are your thoughts about that?
Oh, that's a great question. It's a $64,000 question, at least in system dynamics. Sort of model conceptualization. We're not, at least we don't try in system dynamics to build a digital twin of the real world. I don't think that's even possible, but some people, they want to put everything, including the kitchen sink, into a model. Whereas we don't model a system, we model a problem from a systems perspective. So what's the problem? We say in plain words, in one sentence, tell me what the problem is. To a client, a doctoral student, I always tell them, first question you're going to hear on your doctoral defense, in one sentence, tell me at the dissertation proposal defense, in one sentence, what are you going to do? And at the defense, in one sentence, what have you done? And if you can't answer that, I'm not going to vote to pass you, because we want you to simplify, right? So what's the question? What's the problem? What's the conundrum? And then if it's directly related to that, it's in the model. And if it's not, it's left out. The other sort of important idea is we look for endogenous explanations for things. We look for the design of the airplane. So we want to close feedback loops. So think of a one-way arrow impinging from the outside to the system, and no arrow going back and making a loop. That's exogenous. We don't want to do that. As much as possible, we want an endogenous explanation, although we will shock a model from the outside. That's okay to do. So those are kind of the two basic principles that we try and follow when we're saying, all right, what's important, what should we include, and what shouldn't we include. And if you're a good modeler, you're almost always not the domain expert as well. There's only so many things you can know really well. So often the client, the student who's studying it, whatever, somebody's going to be working with you on the model, and they know a lot about the domain area, and they don't know as much about how to do system dynamics modeling. And so they'll tell you, this is important, or somebody will say, I want that in the model. This happens with clients who are paying you a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And you'll say, well, that doesn't really, I don't think. And they're like, I want it in the model. It's like, okay, you're the boss. So sometimes
I want to change. I want to change tack on that particular point. What do you use for modeling? Because I want you to use Minsky. Have you had a chance to look at it yet?
Not only have I had a chance to look at it, I show the kids in all my classes, and I say, you can pick the software of your choice. We've had people doing system dynamics models in Excel. We have people using Simulink, Minsky, VenSim, PowerSim, Stella. In some sense, it pick your poison. It doesn't matter in some sense. On the other hand, software packages have different advantages and disadvantages, and you kind of got to pick one, I guess, is the way to do it. Because people will ask me in a class, particularly graduate students, is it okay if I use this instead of that? I'm like, yeah, I don't care. It's, as long as it's the equations are right.
Yeah,
I want you to expand on that, Steve.
Yeah, it's partly sort of horses for courses in terms of tools. It's not so much the tool you use; it's the approach. And if you use system dynamics, that's infinitely better than equilibrium modeling and that sort of thing. That's a good start. But the other side is that I want to have a shared toolbox for economists to use, because if you take a look at what the neoclassicals use, if you ever had a look at Dynair.
Sorry, no. Dynair, AIR?
Okay. Dynare. Okay. It's an add-on to MATLAB. You can run it in some of the other.
Oh, okay.
It is dreadful. It is fucking dreadful. I mean, it is a bunch of macros written in MATLAB. And oh my God, whoever put that together has no idea of a user interface. Whereas the whole thing about system dynamics is we want people to see what the system is and be able to look at the system and understand it by seeing it. And so that's why I think with my approach to Minsky and designing it, the godly tables were essential. Of course, that's for the financial modeling, which nobody else can do that to the same ease which Minsky can do it. But in terms of the flowchart, I wanted the flowcharts to be readable by people. And I find the flowcharts in VenSim and Simulink, because there's so many cables going everywhere because you can't pass values by a variable, I think it makes them less readable. So a major focus on designing Minsky is to make it possible to look at the flowchart and understand the dynamics from the flowchart. And their TIES models are just brilliant. So we do need to, I agree with we have to be slightly agnostic, but I want to have a toolbox everybody can use as well.
Yeah, having the ability to understand a model, particularly when you didn't make, when you want to show it to somebody else, and having a visual presentation that is understandable is super important, I think. Yeah.
I wonder, Mike. I wonder how much when somebody, puts the learning required to learn the software, how much are they stuck into that software? So, I mean, I would agree with what you guys are saying. It does make a lot of sense. But let me explain this in a little bit of a different way. If a student focuses on one particular software and then that handicaps him in 5 years, 10 years, not being able to learn, say Minsky, for example, a case could be made to say, we really need to train people so they're proficient on, say, the top 3 software, rather than saying, well, it's your choice. So what do you think about that?
Well, yeah. So I think, first of all, you probably want to get good at one of them so that you can just work efficiently, right? Mm-hmm. But having said that, we have, I don't know what you call it, wizards, or you can open up one software package's model in another software package, and it's pretty close to being an an exact, replication. There are a little bit of differences here and there. There's sort of a base level of stuff that has to be in an SD model, and you can convert your model into this basic, and then it can be opened by a different software package. There's a name that's for the XML or IXML, something like
XML
that.
procedure, yeah.
And it's kind of nice. So because a lot of the barriers, you build 5,000 models over 20 years in Vensim, and then Steve says, "Look at Minsky," and you're like, "But all my models are in."
Right.
Now, if you had a wizard that can you just open up,
yeah,
that
makes
the transition a lot easier. And it's also. I don't think it has to be. This is kind of getting to what you were saying, Daniel. It doesn't have to be either or. It's like I can have several of these packages, and if I want to, I might build a model in Stella and say, but I want to put in some godly tables. I can open it now in Minsky and do that easily. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, you have a hammer and a saw.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, for example, I love the program MathCAD, Mike. In fact, when I visited you in WPI, it was because I was also going to the site where the MathCAD programmers were to meet them and to give them a presentation on how I'm using their software. They were then bought by a company called PTC, and PTC have completely stuffed MathCAD. They've never supported some of the essential operations in MathCAD. So I literally have of the order of 5,000, maybe 10,000 MathCAD files on my computer, and I can no longer open them. I can open them and I can export them to a HTML. But if I want to use them in any other program, I've got to go back and do the whole damn thing all over again. And that company pisses the shit out of me. I hate them for what they've done. So yeah, we need to get some translators so we can actually share stuff from one SD program to another.
Yes, I don't know how some of that was, at least in System Dynamics, it was like, I don't want a wizard that allow you to leave my package and go to my competitor's package.
Yeah.
But it can be frustrating, right? So, because no one package has every single advantage over everything else. At least that's what I found. So you really need a tool kit rather than one tool.
Yeah. On that, I've got to go. Unfortunately got another meeting I can't cancel starting on the hour, so I've got to go quickly. So I'll throw in one more question from you. And this you might not be able to answer because you might have played enough with Minsky. Are there features that you get in the other program that you can't find in Minsky that you'd like to see?
Sorry, that
are there features that the other programs have that Minsky doesn't have?
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I like the most, by the way, about Minsky is seeing the equations in a more traditional format where economists can relate to them as opposed to sort of the Dynamo presentation and all the others. So that would be like one thing. And then the godly tables, of course, is great. The thing I like about Stella the most is the ability to make a gaming interface right in the package. You got a model, it's insightful, you like it, and very easily you can put a dashboard on it with buttons and sliders and gauges and stuff like that and make it into an interactive thing, multiplayer, single player game. And I think that's
right.
And people can play over the internet and stuff like that. And I think for disseminating our stuff, that sort of feature is very important.
And we've been trying to work toward that. Was actually an objective in designing Minsky, but we simply haven't had enough funding to pay for something like that. So Ty makes up his own dashboards by using parameters and sliders. So that's that fundamental element of Minsky means you can design a dashboard if you wish. But like what you're talking about is say, I want a dashboard, and then bang, it whacks all the parameters there, and it gives you a choice. Do you want a slider? Do you want a dial, et cetera, et cetera? That's what we need to program to make us catch up with that particular feature of Stella.
Yeah.
Okay, so Steve,
I've got to head over. I've got to go. So great to see you, Mike.
Yeah, same here, Steve.
Hope one of these days we can meet up again.
So,
lovely,
are
mate.
you?
Hopefully, one other time we'll get together.
Are you here weekly, like at this time?
Yeah.
Oh,
this is a weekly thing. So if you wanted to come and join us again,
maybe I should just have come here every Saturday.
Yeah, you're welcome here every week.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Every week.
Join in the conversation. That'd be fantastic.
I mean, I was broadly aware
we have a different guest every week as well. But
Zero in, yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
well, great. Yeah,
This is
let me try
Ty
to do
and
that.
Daniel's. Yeah, that's great. It's Ty and Daniel's initiative to create this thing, and it's the focus really is being as chatty as possible. And Steve and friends, it literally focuses on the friendship level as well. Hello, Lana, and we hope to get you in here as well one day. Let's talk to Lana about getting her on here too.
I will.
Another very interesting character in the whole area. Okay.
Yeah, we will for sure. Okay, Steve.
But yeah, so it's a regular Saturday to get together and chat. It makes it great. So I'll see you guys later. Continue chatting after I'm gone. Bye bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye, Steve.
Okay, well, that's Steve for you and his chaotic scheduling. The star of the show has left. We're going to transition into the second half of the show now. I don't know, Mike, if you've got a few more minutes to stay.
I'm happy to stay. This is fun.
Okay, so we're going to transition into the next show. The chatters that are watching, you can stay between the cutscene. This is when we get off the rails and Daniel and I go off on rants about the guest and Steve King. But the guest is actually going to stick with us, so we'll have to constrain how we talk about him.
Or not.
Or not. So stick with us. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. If you're watching on Twitter, make sure you retweet it and like, and then come over here and chat. I'm going to put up the cutscene, and we'll see you in a moment. We did it again. Now, as I said, our last show was canceled after you appeared on it, so fingers crossed the executives don't do that again.
The more I read in the neoclassical thing, the more I just, I'm scratching my eyeballs out all the time.
The voice of God in the background.
Oh, geez. Once the coins get warm enough because of your body temperature in the winter, it actually keeps you moderate beer drinking in the evenings. Well, that's inspiring for a Saturday morning. I love making that shit. Now, here's the thing. I've been watching our algorithm, and it seems like Steve is swearing a lot more. So I'm trying to actually timestamp where he swears to see if YouTube takes away views from us, right? I've done my own testing, but it's been later in the show. So now Steve is testing organically, I might add, at the beginning of the show. So I'm glad everybody stuck with us. Remember, hit that like button. If we get up to 30 likes on the YouTube feed, I might wear a suit next week if I can find one. So anyways, Mike, I'm glad you're still with us. What I really wanted to happen, because Steve is pretty much a mentor to me, even though I didn't actually physically go to any of his lectures, is I wanted Christine to come on, but she was a little bit busy. And just to give the audience some background, I've been using Minsky for about 5 years now, and I used it pretty much in isolation, my own hobby on the side. Originally, I was going to use it as a tool to boost productivity at the plant that I was working at, and it turned into a whole nother thing for me. As the years went on, I got hooked up with the System Dynamics Society, and the individual that kind of really hooked me up was Christine Tang. She runs the WPI fan. I forget the actual name, but the
creative learning meeting, CLM. I think they.
Yes. So she has done a lot. Like she not only hooked me up with one of the econ special interest group presentations last year for one of my models, but also the health group run by, now I forget his name. Wade?
Jack Homer or
somebody else who's running it now. I forget his name. But anyways, yeah. Who was it?
Wayne Wakeland?
Yes, yes,
Wayne,
yes.
yeah. He's
Very,
good. He's a good one. Yeah.
very inviting man. So it was actually, I did my first presentation with him. And of course, I'm doing a pandemic model, which is outside of kind of my field. But he was very inviting. You know, the group of people in that special interest group, very kind people. So, but I have Christine to thank for opening the doors, and ultimately I ended up presenting at last year's conference. Although the expo section of the conference gave you 15 minutes to
Talk
present.
fast.
Yeah. So, and during all that time, actually, Steve made me aware of you a couple of years ago. So I've been kind of watching you, and I wish we had this conversation, some time ago, but it's happening now. So that's great. Um, so I'm going to actually kind of geek out here, and I want to know what your favorite SD package is right now, whether it's VinSim, Stella, PowerSim. What is your favorite and why is it your favorite?
Well, right now I'm using Stella, so I would call that my favorite. For many years before that, I used VenSim. Before that, I used PowerSim, and before that, I used Stella. So I've made like a complete circle. As a professor, if you're using a textbook, everybody's always trying to get you to adopt their textbook, right? And you say, yeah, your textbook has to be like way better than what I'm using to go through the effort to change everything, all my notes, all my slides, all whatever. But then at some point, somebody writes a better book and you say, yeah, I got to switch. This is really better. Same thing with Stella. New people took it over. The guy who created it passed away, and his family was trying to run it, but they weren't really system dynamicists. So a couple of SD people took it over, and they've redone it from soup to nuts. And there's a couple of things that really made me pull the trigger and say, all right, I'm going to switch everything over, because it's a big task to do it. One is, I mentioned the gaming interface, which I think is super important. The other is an innovation called loops that matter. And in system dynamics, I mentioned during the regular broadcast that we look for endogenous explanations for things, the design of the system, the design of the airplane for problems, and then we want to redesign it, right? And that means we look for feedback loops. There's actually, people probably don't know this, there's actually a system dynamics song somebody wrote. And the name of the song and the chorus is Close the Loop, because we're looking for feedback loops, right? So there's a feature in Stella called loops that matter. Now, why is that important? It's really been an innovation. Because if you have a linear system dynamics model, a Minsky model, it can be that as well, potato, and you set the model up where a positive feedback loop is dominant. The parameter values are large for that loop. So the gain or the power of that loop is very strong. It will dominate the behavior of the model through the whole simulation. You have to finish the simulation, change the parameter, and rerun it if you want a different loop dominance. But with a nonlinear system, you can have endogenous shifts in loop dominance. So as the bathtubs fill and drain, as the simulation proceeds, this loop can be strong and then it'll get weak. Now this loop is strong and now this one is strong. And that makes it very hard to figure out with a lot of simulations what happened. Well, what happened? The red curve went up and the blue curve went down, but why? Well, sometimes even if you've built the model, you're like, I got to get back to it, and I can't figure out what the heck happened here, because they're so dynamically complex with the nonlinearities and all the loops. Well, loops that matter is a tool now that allows you to diagnose shifts in feedback loop dominance. And it puts the focus back on the loops, and not only that, okay, there's loops, but it tells you what the loops are doing and when they're doing it. And that's really been a monumental advancement in dynamic modeling software. So those two things made me say, I'll pull the trigger, I'll switch my entire catalog of models over to a new package. And then I had to sort of relearn it, because it has been quite a long time since I last used it.
Interesting. Yeah. So that's a struggle right now for because I'm trying to heavily promote Minsky. It does not have, we'll call them diagnostic tools to it. So identifying what your loops are doing is very difficult. So I have played around with Stella, and I think it is leading the pack right now as an SD package. As I would say, it's number one, and I should be promoting Minsky. And if Steve watches this later, sorry, Steve, but it is pretty dominant right now with its features.
Yeah, Minsky has several things that are really good. I mentioned them in the earlier live stream, and the ability to see quickly the equations in a more traditional format, rather than in all the SD packages, you get the old Dynamo format, which is okay. But like economists like to see, a more traditional presentation, or they don't understand it. So then, so that's a great feature. I like the godly tables, and to be blunt, system dynamicists should be routinely doing godly tables and so what are those things called? Social welfare matrices. We got to make sure that all the flows are accounted for, right? And, we try and do that anyway, but there are tools that we should be using, and they're just really not in our sandbox, and they should be. So Minsky has advantages as well, is what I'm trying to say, as do some of the other packages have features here and there,
I got something.
Okay.
While you guys were talking about Minsky, I looked at this thing from Ghost on the half shelf. Okay, he says deep fake the suit, LOL. Okay, so what I did is I downloaded this image of Tyrone Keynes, and are you guys ready for the deep fake?
Oh geez.
Yeah. Oh geez. Okay. Look. I mean, hey, it's not going to be an exact replica of Tyrone. I was like, that's not Tyrone, but this is what the AI generated. Okay, you guys ready?
Okay.
Bam.
What? What?
Wow.
Does like some aging algorithm as well? Because
this is Tyrone's dad.
Oh boy, I do like. So those are the suits that I was talking about with Don Cherry. Now, Mike, I'm assuming because you're in Boston, you know who Don Cherry is.
Yeah.
Even though, yeah. So those, for the viewers, Don Cherry would wear a very unique suit like that each. And Don Cherry has had a fall from grace because he was very outspoken on his shows, and he got himself in a lot of trouble. But he wore these really fancy suits, and I thought, geez, wouldn't that really boost? Instead of all this, boring stuff about system dynamics I always talk about, what if I just wear a really fancy suit, say some big words, and people might listen to me more? So
yeah, John Daly, the golfer, wears really flamboyant, I guess they're called loudmouth or something, suits.
oh, there we go. There's the man Don Cherry with all his suits. I'm pretty sure they're actually in the fourth picture showing his very last broadcast when he said something about, I don't know, probably about Russians again.
Which one do you guys want me to click on? We're going to enlarge one of them. Ty, Mike, which one do you guys think we should click on here?
Well, actually, I'm a traditionalist, so I like the second one, the plaid one. I think that's very Canadian, eh?
Oh, that's his Twitter profile.
He's got Twitter still? I thought he would have went into hiding.
Well, people are probably just running it.
Yeah,
for him,
I like that. I could do that. In fact, I'm thinking about changing it. So I'm going to wear a suit. I'm going to do the thumbs up that's going across all my social media.
No, but are you doing the Shooter McGavin? Look at, that's a thumb up. But are you actually doing the finger pointing?
Is he pointing a finger or putting his
Yeah,
thumb
like
up?
kaboom, kaboom,
Oh,
kaboom,
it's a
kaboom.
small picture, so it's very hard to see.
All right, let me make it a little bigger for everybody.
I wonder if we,
Boom,
I wonder if
boom.
we, I wonder if we could get Don Cherry on the show. I know
think so.
it doesn't quite meet the keen friend category, but it should be entertaining, wouldn't it?
I think
You know,
so.
yeah. The YouTube algorithm would be all over us then. Okay, so
We might break the algorithm, I think,
can we talk? And I don't know if this is outside of Mike's expertise, but I've been watching Bloomberg a little bit, and I've been watching the SVB situation, which a few people have commented on. And SVB is the Silicon Valley Bank. I've been seeing a lot of things on Twitter that I don't know if I believe what they're saying. Here's the thing: so banks carry their primary asset is right now in America is treasuries. So these are bonds created by the Treasury and the government, and mortgage-backed securities, which I think is declining quite a bit. So the problem that I've been seeing is that the value of treasuries, as interest rates have gone up, the value of treasuries have gone down. Um, so that is an asset for the bank. On the flip side, if you hold liabilities at a constant, that means your equity is going to go down. I've been seeing people, there's been withdrawals, and I've been wondering, well, if people are withdrawing their money from a bank and their assets are going down at the same time, that's actually good because it helps keep the bank's equity in positive territory. So I've been seeing people say, well, it's people withdrawing their money, it's causing a systemic problem. But when I sit and think about it, I'm like, well, if the initial problem is the value of their assets are declining, which they are for all banks, because treasuries, their yields going up, the value of the asset goes down, that would be a good thing. Mike, do you follow any of that? And do you have anything you could comment about it?
Well, it was just recently in the news, and I guess I was a little surprised because after the last financial crisis, the government installed all these stress tests for banks and what have you. So, with the idea that they'll find out ahead of time before something bad happens, so I was a little bit surprised. Obviously, today we don't have runs on the banks like you did during the Great Depression because now we have monetary theory and the Fed knows what they're doing, I suppose, and at least they put the brakes on these things. And so I don't, beyond that, I don't really have if there's any contamination, let me put it that way. If there's any contamination, then there's a much bigger problem here. If it's a one-off, the bank was mismanaged or whatever, then unfortunate, but not a crisis. But yeah, certainly if they're intertwined with a bunch of other institutions and dominoes start falling, then that's very bad.
Yeah, when I took and this is just a mental exercise, sitting back and looking at the situation where I see the problem is if people are withdrawing their money, the way it works generally in the United States is banks use reserves to transact with each other. So if a bunch of reserves are leaving the Silicon Bank, those reserves are going to other banks, and that would boost their assets. It's very complex. I was trying to really play it in my mind how it would be a contagion, this specific problem. And it's
so
just...
Go ahead. Sorry. So if you go think about it in terms of teaching economics, what we don't do when we teach money, credit, and banking traditionally is teach people about how a bank runs. A little bit. There's T accounts and things. But, somebody, a master's student, a doctoral student, depending the scope of the project, should do a model of a bank, a commercial bank, possibly the Silicon Valley Bank, right? And see if you could get the model to mimic the crisis and then see what should they have done to redesign the bank so that crisis wouldn't have happened, or if there was some contamination that began to stop it and what have you. But that's not traditionally what we do. We should, in fact, what we should do is not only have somebody build the model of a bank like that, but first go to a bank and spend some time there and say, what do you do? Right? Economists traditionally don't do that. You know, you have theory and you build these mathematical monstrosities. And then you have, you know, empirical work, which is you remain behind your desk and you download an Excel spreadsheet of data from the Fed's Fred system or who knows where, and then you begin torturing it with econometrics. You never get out from behind your desk and say, I'm going to build a banking model or study a bank. What do you do in a bank? I mean, I get it. You know, you accept money and, you know, what, but go behind the scenes, spend some time and find out what they do. If you're going to build a pricing model, have you ever talked to anybody Steve was talking earlier about some guy he was talking to who had some kind of matrix thing going on, a Straussian thing where there was no markups or something. I wasn't entirely following all the details, but how about we go and talk to somebody who sets prices at a company and say, what do you do? They can tell you. They do it all the time. And you can write an equation that captures that. And economists are not taught to do that. I think that's crazy. You know?
Yeah, I agree. And that kind of stuff goes back to Steve often attacks the marginal cost theory. Whereas there have been empirical studies that show marginal costs actually go down for companies. So when you build a plant, you don't build a plant thinking you're going to start at 100% capacity, and so your productivity goes down each worker you add. You probably build a plant thinking you're starting at 60% capacity, and each worker you add actually does fully increase your output, and there is no productivity loss. And yeah, I do agree. Economics seems to be taught from the theoretical standpoint and ignores real world realities. So yeah, Daniel.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
I'm trying to do some more deep faking.
Now, so here's the thing. You know, I'm not a podcaster or a live streamer, so you're leaving me here. I just come in and direct the conversation. So I've been left to sound really intellectual with a very prominent intellectual guy in Mike. So do you have
you guys are doing great. You guys are doing great. I was really enjoying that, right? I mean,
do you have any input other than trying to put suits on pictures of me, which in some ways is pretty creepy, because I'm wondering if I were to ever go to your house and look in the tie folder, what would I find in there?
Well, I do have a question for Mike, and I'm a philosopher, right? So I go to first principles all the time, right? And I look at this, and I'm gonna bring a question to you in this way, Mike. How do you check your own bias or your own ideological direction, I guess, in your classes? And I'll preface that by saying it's there, right? I mean, it is there. It's in academia. Steve is very, liberal or like moderately liberal, but has some extremist positions on climate, which I agree with. But, kind of like step me through that sort of minefield of how you bring an empirical feeling to a discipline like economics and keep the objective part of it either out of the equation, which I don't think is necessarily the best thing, but being able to segregate it, identify it, and work through anything that is subjective with your own teaching methodologies and stuff like that. So how would you?
Yeah, got it. It's a great question, and it's certainly relevant today with all the polarization in society and what have you. So what I do when I teach economics classes is I pretty much start from a schools of thought perspective. I've made a chart that starts with old Adam Smith at the top, and who did he influence, and who influenced who, and you get down to the bottom. So time goes from top to bottom, which is a little weird when you're used to seeing it go left to right. And you see how the great thinkers influenced one another. And at the end, you get schools of thought. And on one side of the figure, most of the schools of thought are free market, laissez-faire-ish. And there's different, levels of that, but they're kind of all in that camp. And on the other side of the figure, you end up with statist schools of thinking in economics. And, broadly speaking, they're different, but if you're on the one side, you kind of all get along. And if you're on the other side, you kind of all get along. And it all boils down to how much influence should the government have in economic activity, right? Mm. And then wherever possible, I try and tell the kids, all right, on the one hand, if you're from the free market side, you'd be arguing this. And if you're on the other side, you'd be arguing that. And I always tell them, pick your point. I'm not going to tell you how to think about it, but you probably want to be aware of both sides, both arguments, and whatever resonates, right? Mm-hmm. By the way, in system dynamics, what we say is actually quite modest. What we say is we have models that we use every day. They're inside of our head. They're mental models, and we use them to make all of our decisions. And they're good. They're very rich in content, and they're flexible and what have you. But humans are very bad dynamic simulators. We can't mentally accurately think through the dynamics of our own mental model, then say, what if I change one thing and then mentally simulate it and compare accurately the difference? So we simply say in system dynamics, we take our mental model, or if we're working with others, sort of a consensus mental model, and make it formal. And then the machine can mercilessly trace through the dynamics of that mental system. So it's right. Simply your opinion. But others can see what it is now, right? Because now you've laid it bare. And if somebody disagrees, you can say, well, all right, what do you think that part of do you disagree with the entire model? Or no, that's okay, that's okay. Yeah, people are born, they get middle-aged, and they get old, and they die. Are we going to bicker about that? No, leave that in the model. Okay, that's fine. Well, where do we disagree?
Yeah.
Okay, let's run the model each way. Let's run it your way. Let's run it my way. A lot of times it doesn't matter. It's these adaptive things that happen in the system. It doesn't matter. Why are we bickering about that? Let's find a leverage point in the system where we can do a deep dive.
Do you find? Yeah. Do you go ahead, Ty? I had another question lined up on the assembly line. But...
No. Go. Ask the other question. This is interesting stuff. So ask.
So, a Marxist thinker, okay, for example. I don't know what your thoughts are at this point. It doesn't really matter. I'm curious about whether you butt heads with that type of pedigree, we'll say. Okay, is this something that you come across a lot with either competing or shared thinking? Maybe touch on that.
Yeah. So one of the things in one of my classes, I built system dynamics models of many of the great thinkers from Adam Smith to the present day, including Schumpeter and Marx and what have you. And I try and keep the variable names and stuff as consistent as possible, so everybody can see thinker to thinker what these people were saying, whether they're similar, whether they're different, and what have you. I think somebody like Marx was super interesting as an economist, right? And, like if we take the guy's ideas and lay them out there, what do we got? Let the machine trace through the dynamics of his sort of mental model, or written version of his mental model. So I think that's all fine. Now, whether or not that leads to us all, changing the way we run society is another matter, But I have no objection whatsoever to take anybody's theory or model and take John Kenneth Galbraith. Let's build a system dynamics model of the new industrial state, and let's see what old John Kenneth had to say about things. Is his model internally consistent? What are its dynamics? A lot of the great thinkers, they didn't have the tools or the expertise to write equations, right? And they didn't have simulation anyway. When I first started out trying to get system dynamics into economics, this is 40 years ago. So I was in my 20s. the people running economics, all the journals and whatever, were my age now. So they were in their 50s and 60s. So they did their PhDs in the 50s. So, I said simulation. They were like, I was like talking, like from Mars, because they were like, we don't know what we just don't do that in economics, So I don't blame anybody for not having that, sort of viewpoint back in the day. But today we can do it. And today we have people who play video games all the time. Simulation is no big deal to be below a certain age. Everybody's like, well, of course, simulations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good answer. Yeah. Without the emotion, right? I mean, yeah. Okay. Ty, what's your...
We have a question here. I don't know if Mike can answer it. I'll put it up here. So question for Mike. Fred Guy and Joseph Huber and others say central bank money can't be used by public. Boon to financialization. Huber says CBDCs would alter that. Do you agree with the system change? Now, I don't understand that question too much, but maybe Mike can read into it a little more.
Yeah, the answer is I wouldn't have a good scholarly answer just off the top of my head right here, but it's a good question. And I think that's the kind of thing you would use dynamic modeling for. You'd have to lay out all what you'd learn in a money, credit, and banking book with T accounts, assets and liabilities. You trace through all of the changes, including the central bank money side of the T account area. Those are stocks. So we could model that, and we could say, this is an airplane design question. Again, is that a good design? Should we be changing that design? I think the burning. So I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer just at the moment. I wouldn't want to start spitballing because I'll say something dumb. It requires a deeper dive.
I'll do that.
Hold on.
I'll do that.
That's part of the show.
Yeah, but he's got the academic credentials. There's some sort of like, he can't. He just like there's something that holds him back. He can't.
But I do think
that's good.
I do think though, a question in that genre that's super important is a federal, in the United States, a Federal Reserve digital currency, Fed coins and all that. I think that's coming, and it could be even worldwide, where all the computers are linked. And, I think that cries out for modeling and analysis as to what are the implications, good and bad, for a design change like that, and fundamentally altering the monetary system.
That's very interesting. So you take a country like Venezuela, let's use Venezuela as an example. I guess like their position or their sophistication or their implementation of a monetary system is different than, we'll say, the United States. So what you're proposing would have the effect of equalizing global trade and transactions throughout the world. Is that what the idea is?
Well, there's a whole lot. So yeah, that would be, I suppose, part of a digital. So it would be kind of like a Bitcoin, but controlled by the government, by the state, not privately or anonymously used like what we think of a Bitcoin sort of thing. Yeah, you might have an account just with your central bank and not through a commercial bank. What does that mean? Are the banks going to stand for that, or what would their role be? And the idea that your spending could be closely monitored, and and your spending could be turned off by the central bank. If you've purchased too many fossil fuels this month, you've hit your maximum allowed amount. And so now your Federal Reserve card doesn't work at a gas station until the first of the month, or what? There's there's all sorts of implications for worldwide trade, global trade, as you mentioned, as well as civil liberties and ease of use, and how you pay your taxes and what have you. And I think it's. I mean, the Fed is working on it right now in the United States.
I personally, Mike, I personally think it should be a voluntary program. And I think, because I would sign up for it. I would. But if you force people to sign up for it, then you get that pushback and the movement starts to snowball, and the trucker strikes, or the whole, all that sort of like anomaly of population starts to emerge because of fear or government control or however it's spun, right? So, my suggestion would be that it's a voluntary rollout, and I'm going to go back to that invisible hand thing, because let the market shape it. And I want to be really careful with that, because it sounded like you were, not a fan of conceptualizing, the market forces and using Adam Smith's, idea of the invisible hand.
Not at all. Those are feedback systems. From a system dynamics point of view, a traditional Adam Smith system are negative loops. So they're trying to stabilize the system like a thermostat is, right? A speculative bubble would be a positive loop, working its way through price. And so you have this fight now between the negative loops and the positive loops to see what happens. And you either get a nice stable Adam Smith thing, or a speculative bubble in the housing market, or in tulip bulbs, or what have you. So, it's it's not like there aren't market forces. There absolutely are, and they need to be understood and modeled, but there's other stuff that gets in there as well. And on net, what happened, because for certain things, markets are fine. I think trading options is probably best done in a market, right? Or futures contracts or something. Other things, maybe not so much. I'm not sure that if I have a monopoly in insulin and you're a diabetic, I should be charging you $10,000 a shot. So it kind of depends, but certainly the disaggregated decisions voluntary decisions by free people can often do a better job than some bureaucrats somewhere in a tower in a capital city issuing orders, right? So it kind of just depends on spillovers and all sorts of econ ideas as to whether. So it's hard to make a blanket statement one way or the other.
Yeah. No, I hear you. Back to the philosophy piece. I think this is going back to ancient Greece and the birth of a Hellenized, Western society. This, to me, was a market was essential in that formation of an exchange of ideas and goods and an interaction between populations. And I think fundamentally that's what a function of a market should be. The idea is it supposed to be, and I know the answer to it, is it supposed to be local? What sizes are optimal? Where do we focus on, like, small groups, large national sort of initiatives, right? Like, there's a lot of complexity to how to model even just how the groups interact. And we're not even getting at a point where we're talking about model or agent-based modeling yet. I'm just saying, population models, right? Would you agree with something like that? And I was being very vague. I mean, like, how, if I was a graduate student and I came to you and I said, I'd like to model something like that, would you hammer me a little bit more and ask a few more questions, or would you get right to that question of what's the problem you're trying to solve?
Yeah, well, that's kind of where we start, right? Is, well, what are we trying to accomplish here? What's the question? Because, if you can build a very large Minsky model, Stella model, doesn't matter, that isn't very insightful, right? You say, well, if I make this parameter a little bigger, it'll grow faster. If I make it smaller, it'll grow slower. And when you run the model, it does that. Well, why build the model? I mean, it doesn't tell you anything, right? So presumably you go through all the trouble of building one of these things correctly because there's stuff you don't know, right? You're curious about, or there's a problem or what have you. So, we would probably have a conversation about that sort of thing. Now, I think Forster would always tell us the great thinkers of history are systems thinkers. And he would read Tolstoy and find all of the systems thinking ideas in Tolstoy and write them up in a paper, for example. So I think there is an awful lot of room for an interested person, a doctoral student, a master's student, whatever, to say, I want to take the works of so-and-so and build a system dynamics model or a family of system dynamics models that represent these ideas and explore them dynamically, probably in a way that the originator of the ideas was unable to do because they wrote in an era without the technology we have. And a lot of times you reveal, I find a lot when I teach econ, I'll take comparative static stuff, traditional stuff, famous stuff, and I'd say, let's make it dynamic. And we'll do that and we'll make it exactly do, what the comparative static thing does. Same equations, same equilibria, all that stuff. And they say, what's goofy about this? Anything that's a little weird here? And you can get the students to say, shouldn't that be a stock? Shouldn't that be a flow? Whatever. I say, all right, let's change that now. And as soon as you start doing that, you start to see that a lot of these famous things are quite lacking. Again, we're not going to pick on somebody who did something back in 1947 or something and say, we're smarter than you because they didn't have what, but when you start to explore some of that stuff, you're like, yeah, some of this stuff is a little bit sketchy. I mean, what's in the textbooks, that when you examine it with these tools, you start to learn stuff. And I think, reading some great work of philosophy or political science or what have you and say, all right, what is this person saying? Let's see if we can map out what this person is saying. And then you start to see some of the implications. We had a doctoral student from Iran, and there's a well-known Iranian scholar at Oxford University in the UK who wrote about the socioeconomic structure of the Iranian society. And the guy had written for years and his stuff was all over the place. Where our doctoral student pulled all this guy's writings together and built a system dynamics model of what he was saying. And then I said, send it to him. He'll probably not respond. He's a famous guy. But what if he responds? He responded. And he said, this is really good. I really like what you did. I agree with most of what you did.
That's fascinating. Yeah, we just can't do that with the posthumously with all the great thinkers that have passed on. So, with that idea of standing on the shoulders of giants that I think Newton or someone before him actually said, we can't. And that's why it adds up. That's why knowledge is cumulative, right? And I think we've talked on this show before about what if Keynes had the computing power that we have now. Can you imagine that? That's incredible, right? Incredible. Yeah.
So I have to just alert everybody. We have reached over 30 likes on YouTube, so I will be wearing a suit next week. So I'm going
things you don't see often from an economist.
Woot, woot.
So I also want to make sure we recognize our viewers each week. So I'll go back to our list. I'll name them off. We have Ghost on the half shelf. Ghost, you're always here, and we appreciate you. The name that I cannot pronounce is Zimborsky. If I'm wrong, sorry. We've got WWE fan 0104, and I'll tell you, the WWE was really good about 23 years ago when it was WWF and we had Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock. Those were good times. After that, I stopped watching. We've got Renora. We have Jean Marie Bontemps. We have our master troll Potato Sack. Potato Sack is not with us this week. I believe he was shamed away into oblivion. Murphy, Guy Midgley, Demetrius Gazilies, and Tom Kinnair. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing the names right. I either cannot read myself or some of these names are gibberish names. But hey, it was worth a try.
Ty's kind of funny because that middle one. Put it up there again, Ty.
Okay,
That middle Jean Marie Bontemps, right? I mean, Ty is Canadian. He just I don't think you've ever been to the there's no French immersion in you there at all.
Yeah. So here's the thing: is I don't do a lot of time in Quebec. So when I read that as a Western Canadian, and I admit Western Canadians might not be that cultured, maybe they are, but I see a bon and then I see temps, bon temps.
It's a good time.
Now, can you pronounce how I was supposed to say it?
Bon temps.
Oh, bon temps. Okay.
Jean-Marie.
Jean-Marie. Yeah.
Jean-Marie. Good time. Bon temps. Good time. Yeah, it's a good time. That's a good last name to have.
I would just always want to make sure we thank our viewers because they make the show a lot more interesting. There's usually a sub conversation going on in the chat. I try to get in there through our 2-hour period to say hello. But out of that sub chat, a lot of good questions come up, and we try to get to the questions. If we don't get to them, it's because we're just, talking so much. Yeah, and we're too lazy to press a button to bring it up on the screen. But we love you guys, and we love having you each week. There'll be a new list next week. It's funny. I should be more excited about economics when I come on this show each week, but I'm more excited about seeing the people that are here, right, and what they're talking about. It's my little way to be engaged with a larger circle that's outside of my own home circle. So thank you so much for coming on. Mike, what can we cover here? Okay, go ahead, Mike. What were you going to say?
Oh, if you got something to say, I'll hold off. I just wanted to pose a question that's a little bit self-serving, but it would be helpful to me, if that's all right.
Yes, please.
So what we found over the years at my university is that a lot of people would like to learn how to do system dynamics, whether it's using Stella or Minsky or whatever, and also apply it to economics. In fact, if you talk to the System Dynamics Society's central office, the number one question they get is, where do I go to learn this stuff? And number two is, I'm interested in economics and system dynamics. But most people who are interested in learning how to do this SD and then applying it to economics do not want to enroll at our university as a student. They already have a terminal degree. They're enrolled in a graduate program somewhere else. They don't need credits from us. They don't need another university connection, but they just want to learn how to do it and then learn it, how to apply it to economics. So what we're going to be launching soon is a YouTube channel called Trending Cycles, where we're going to present, nuts and bolts. How do you do it? At least our way of doing it. And then the specific applications in economics. And then we're going to have a MOOC site. We're going to use a platform called Thinkific. And for a very modest fee, I mean, we got to pay for the, access. So there's got to be a very small fee. You can kind of do the same thing that's on YouTube, but you'll have all the course materials and you'll get a badge, a credential, and what have you. And if there's enough interest, we were thinking that, once you've passed a number of the courses, we could have a premium website or something where among the things you could do would be to get mentorship, because we found over the years that you can go from, I don't know anything about how to do this modeling, to sort of the intermediate level by taking classes, reading books, doing homework assignments, and all that stuff. But it's hard to get to that next level without a more experienced modeler helping you. saying, all right, let's take a look at your model. What are you trying to do over here? Aha, I see. Okay, I get it. Let me suggest a better way of doing that. Blah, 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 blah. And that tends to get people over the threshold into sort of the PhD level, expert modeler level. So it's going to be launched soon. I mean, we have all the stuff. It's just we're preparing the materials. Is this a good idea? Would people go to this place and hang around with us and what have you? Or is it another one of my great ideas that will go into my closet of great ideas and never be seen again?
So I actually watched your presentation about 4 months ago on one of the Friday meetings. I wish I was actually there live, because I thought, I want to be involved in that. That's okay. So let's say we have two dominant forms of modeling. We have agent-based and system dynamic modeling. Agent-based is very popular. System dynamics is not. And that's not to say system dynamics is not as good. They both have their applications. Whole nother conversation. Yeah. So I think it's a great idea what you're proposing. I think it's a good idea to sort of separate it from the academic realm. So you're attracting pure practitioners, which I am. And I think it will involve a little bit of showboating. I think it's a good idea. So Dan and I had a similar idea using Thinkific. We were going to try to get Steve involved, but he's doing his own thing right now. Where we would actually run a course using Minsky to meld economics and system dynamics. We just haven't really pushed with the idea beyond the initial idea. So when I saw that 4 months ago, I was very interested. The thing is how do you push it to a wider audience? Because if you just say system dynamics and economics, well, that is very niche. But if you were to somehow say how the world works and how money works, then you broaden the conversation. There would have to be some showboating and marketing behind it, which I know goes against the whole academic thing where everything is factual, we're basing everything off papers. But my big thing with system dynamics over the last 5 years is how do we kind of showboat and promote it as a fun tool? So that's my thought.
I think the gaming thing is going to help us there, where you'll say, look, if this interests you, here's a link, go to the game and play it and see if you can run the city better than your mayor.
That's great.
That kind of thing. People like games. Right?
Yes.
It's a bit of a niche. I think if it takes off at all, we'll have to start getting interesting people involved in economics or systems modeling or something at whatever level to, join a podcast, this sort of forum to enhance what is a Rungakutta method? What is it? I mean, that's necessary to learn how to do it. But if it's just that, it's like, oh, geez, your eyes glaze over. Right?
Yeah. So gaming, is a huge thing. In fact, that's what got me into system dynamics, was able to run a system. And Minsky's a little bit unique where you can slow down your timer and then adjust parameters so you can game as you go. So for instance, in an economic model, you could change your interest rate, change the amount of reserves in the banking sector. And so it's a flight simulator. And that's really attractive to people just liking the game. And so I think that would be one of the methods, and I use the word showboating, one of the ways to showboat system dynamics and take it beyond the technical academic stuff is where eyes glaze over, unless you're really interested in complex systems. And I think that was another part for me, as I've always, since being a child, I've always been interested in how the process works. with a bunch of different variables. That's always been with me as a child. That takes a certain person. But I think the gamification part, that's in everybody. That's in it. To participate, pull levers, see what happens. That stuff becomes really fascinating, right? For everybody. Nobody would be excluded from that. And that gets into building interfaces, but that would have to be, I think, a big part of what you're proposing.
Good. Yeah. Thanks for that. That's helpful. Seems like maybe we're on the right track.
Yeah.
I think so. I'd have a lot more questions too about it in terms of staying organized and what the week-to-week plan is. A couple things in terms of like revising the UI interface for and the experience for gaming. I would say basically how good is it, right? I mean, how engaging is it, and what are the learning outcomes, and how does it step through the process? And you've added, by putting it game theory into the equation, you've added something that from the outside sounds great, but the execution on it is kind of where I would dig deeper, because in and of itself, a YouTube channel with people talking about this and just a straight up well-written course has value to itself as a baseline, right? And so although I love the idea of gamifying it, I'm wondering if you're putting too much into it. This is just a subtle form of criticism to say, are we doing the gaming part really well? Have we done the course really well? Right? And maybe it's one thing has to happen before the bells and the whistles of gamifying comes into play. Just being a little more conservative on that front, right?
Yeah, certainly games can be overused or used at the wrong time. So they're not a panacea for everything, but they can be powerful when used correctly, and created correctly, designed correctly. Excuse me. And so getting all that right is going to be, excuse me, part of the question.
I think also an endeavor like this, you want to remain current. So applying system dynamics and the gamification to a current event. So for instance, we were talking about the Silicon Valley Bank. You know, that I think would be another part of this Thinkific course is there a dynamic way to your problems that you're addressing in this course, which should always be problems, would be current. So it has it because these current events impact our lives currently. So they're most prominent on the mind. So if you could stay in the realm of what's happening in society currently, and then apply system dynamics and gamify it so people have a way to engage in that system, that would be fascinating as well. Although that would be very complicated to pull off, staying current with a course, let's say in Thinkific.
Well, I think you'd have to sort of crowdsource it and just say to the students taking the classes, pick something that's in the news and build a model of it, and we'll host it on a server or something. Give you
I'll do one better on that. I own a media outlet, and I mean, I let's do some platonic idealizing. That's not even a word, but let's look at this and say, okay, what would be the simplest thing that we could describe this as a success? We'd say, well, it becomes the new societal norm, and it's everywhere and transforms universities, everyone on the planet, every university on the planet. That's a little bit too far-fetched. Let's notch it down a few. Okay. I think that that some of the things that I hear about how to deploy through YouTube and through a course and through all these types of things, let's look, and if we could put a pinpoint into in the timeline when that first started to hit the market. I don't know, it'd be several years ago now, right? Because online courses have, been there for a little while. So what I'm trying to actually prime you for, Mike, is to say, how do you anticipate and stay ahead of something that would be and catch the next phase? Now, this is the entrepreneurial Daniel coming into the equation, right? So you need to anticipate something. And I own a media outlet. And if I were to exercise my platonic superpowers, I would say, wouldn't it be great if I could bring on a journalist that had a desire to speak intelligently and report on the news empirically and bring people into that. And here is the training profile, right? Then it becomes a profession in a way that that transforms their identity, moves into more of a, now they become thought leaders in their own right with a solid foundation to report on the facts in a way that they can, take autonomy for what they're doing and have empirical foundation for their models, right?
Gives them a framework for interpreting what's going on in the news or what have you, and then producing a coherent. Yeah.
Exactly. And I would even say something like you graduate the course and, now you have a link code, you can share it, people can sign up, you can earn a little bit of revenue. Now, this is one of the areas that the academic community gets a little bit weird about because they're like, well, we don't want to monetize. But here's the thing about monetizing. Monetizing is one of the ways that a feedback loop actually is very telling. It tells you how successful you are. It tells you how people, when they're parting with their money, and it also tells you how that incentive works. That, maybe I'm leaning a little bit towards more of a self-interest sort of, the butcher baker story, right? But I think ultimately and I probably do subscribe to that ultimately a system that addresses self-interest and growth with money, people can make money with it and then feed in that community. You're looking at that catalyst. And I think that coming up with a very comprehensive plan around that, where it's been vetted and talked about and, maybe even modeled, might really open up our eyes.
Oh, I gotta unmute myself. We're almost running out of time here. I think we're gonna try to maybe get Mike in a semi-reoccurring role to come on Saturdays if he has the time, because I think he really. Here's my agenda in this is I'm trying to push system dynamics, and I think Mike would do well in pushing that along with me here on the show. So we're gonna try to get him on a little more often if he likes to come on, because that would be great. We've got to cut the show. So first and foremost, and I had to practice with my wife saying your name last week. So it's Mike Radzicki. Now, boy, did I get that wrong. If I say it fast, Mike Radzicki. I was struggling. In fact, that intro I had to do for the show, I did about 30 takes, and it was just your name. But for some reason, now I'm getting it, Radzicki. Right? Am I saying it right? Radzicki.
Yeah.
Perfect. So we are really happy we had Mike Radzicki on the show, and we're going to do it again. I'm glad, Daniel, you decided to once again come on the show and tolerate me for 2 hours. We're always happy that Steve is on the show, even though he was a little bit busy today. He's back every week. We will see you next week. Thank you for chatting. Thank you for liking, all that fun stuff. We have another guest next week, so see you then. Mike, stick with us right after the show. We'll talk after. Anyways, guys, see you later.